Welcome to the very best part of my broadcast week. You know, this show sometimes sets itself right in the flow of news, and this episode does precisely that. There is a raging conflict going on in Israel between Israel and Hamas. There is a war in Europe still going on, Russia and Ukraine. And we are going to spend the hour with the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Jack Reed of Rhode Island. Mr. Chairman, great to see you.
Good to see you too, Major.
And just to set the scene, we are in Senator Reed's hideaway, Office 144, the United States Capitol. Thanks for the hospitality.
Thank you.
Let's do some quick politics first.
Okay.
We are recording this. What is the date on my watch? November 8th, Thursday afternoon. Moments ago, your colleague, Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, said he's not running for re-election. Your reaction?
Well, Joe has been a great support in the Senate. He's a member of the Armed Services Committee, which I chair. He has been extremely helpful on so many different issues, and he's taken a lot of tough votes. And he's also tried to maintain a bipartisan rapport, which is less and less common around here. And as an individual, he's someone I respect a great deal.
A blow to Senate Democrats. He's not seeking re-election?
Well, he's obviously, in my mind, the best candidate for West Virginia. He's, for many reasons. One, he's the incumbent, but also he is West Virginia born and bred. He relates. He's very good. I think we will have a good candidate, and we'll fight the fight. And I'm not giving up hope yet on West Virginia or any state, because we saw this week in the elections in Ohio, elections across the country, where there are a lot of issues that independents and even some Republicans are siding with Democrats.
And if you're a Democrat looking for inspiration or hope in West Virginia, you might look at Kentucky.
Absolutely. You've got a lot of similarities there in terms of their economy, the regionality, and the Governor Beshear did an excellent job, and he did it by the old-fashioned way, going out, talking to the voters, and then pointing out how much he's done for the state. And we hope we can get a candidate like that in West Virginia.
In his video announcement, Senator Manchin said he would be traveling the country boldly. I don't think if you're a politician, you ever intend to travel the country timidly. But anyway, does that sound to you like someone who might be entertaining a no-labels alternative third-party candidacy? I know No Labels doesn't like third-party, but that's essentially what it is.
Right. Initially,
and as your friend and colleague, what would you counsel him about that?
Well, no, I would counsel him to, take the high road, which he will, which is to talk about issues that are of concern to the American people, which will and promote bipartisan solutions. And I think he'll be very adept at that. I think also, incidentally, he's going to stay in the public eye, which is good because he's a thoughtful and conscientious public servant. And the other nice thing about it, too, is he's not just going to relax and go off into the mountains. So he's
right, but
still
you cannot regard as benign a possible candidacy for the presidency if it harms President Biden.
Well, that's a possibility. But, again, I think Joe's objective is not so much to disrupt the election. It's to engage on these important issues. If he finds some traction, well, that might be another case altogether. But I think his initial thought is to go out and start talking seriously on the way we can solve these problems in a bipartisan fashion.
All right, let's get to the news at hand. Again, November 8th, Thursday afternoon, so there's been developments today.
Yes, sir.
Israel has announced that it will provide a daily corridor for humanitarian assistance and refugee movement from northern parts of Gaza southward, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Is that helpful? Is that enough? How do you regard that announcement from the Israeli government?
I think that's real progress, and it's been a result of the president's quiet diplomacy directly with the Israeli government. And it's not just a humanitarian effort. It's also a very smart operational effort. One is that you want to disassociate the Palestinian population from Hamas. So you want to offer them safety and security. And you also want to signal to the Palestinians that the goal of the Israeli forces is not their destruction, but the destruction of Hamas. So I think both in an operational sense and a humanitarian sense, it's very important. And I don't think it would have happened without the president's gentle suggestions.
And when you say gentle, you mean not sort of being more aggressive in a rhetorical way publicly, but being more persuasive privately?
I think that's exactly right. I think we have been trying to provide Israel with all the resources they need to win. That includes munitions, it includes sophisticated military equipment, but it also includes the advice that we learned the hard way in Iraq and in Afghanistan, is that one thing you want to do as quickly as possible is separate these terrorist groups, and Hamas is a terrorist group, from the population. If you can get the population on your side, then the chances are of effectively taking down the radicals is very, very increased.
Mr. Chairman, that there is probably no place on planet Earth where that is harder to do than Gaza? Separate the Palestinians from Hamas and Hamas from the Palestinians who live there?
I think that's
either operationally, psychologically, or any other way.
I think that's very true, but I think you have to try that. You can't just sort of write it off, because not only it affects the internal dynamics of Palestine, but also it affects the worldview of the efforts that the Israelis are trying to make. They suffered a grievous blow by Hamas. 7th. I mean, depravity. It wasn't a military operation. It was sadistic depravity. And they have to not only take out Hamas, but they have to do it in a way that minimizes the impact on the Palestinian people. And it's not an easy task, not an easy task at all. But in the long run, this goes back to theories for hundreds of years. In the long run, if the people are with you and the bad guys are more vulnerable, and that's what they want to do.
So let's talk in very practical terms. Jack Reed, Chairman of the Armed Services Committee on the Senate side. Since October 7th, according to the United Nations, 756 aid trucks have made it into Gaza. Before October 7th, 455 trucks a day were making that journey. There's not enough getting in, is there?
No, not at all.
And people are suffering massively, the civilians, wherever they are, whether they're in the northern part of Gaza or the southern part, which is theoretically somewhat safer. Mm-hmm. What needs to be done, and what role should the U.S. play?
Well, the U.S. has to continue to urge, and there's been made some progress. I mean, we went from nothing getting in to the 100 trucks a day, but that is not enough. We have to get more supply routes in. We have to think creatively. Can we take supplies over the sea from Cyprus, for example, bring them in? Maybe we could let our Corps of Engineers put up temporary dockage so that the ships can get in. That would be in concert and in collaboration with the Israelis. I was over there, as you probably know, in the Middle East. We sat down with the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia, and I urged him personally that they should be devoting billions of dollars to a fund that would help the international organizations move more food and more vital supplies into
That was with the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. Was he receptive to that idea?
He didn't dismiss it. He was very diplomatic about saying that's...
take it under advisement in the old phrase.
Yes, exactly. But I think we have to plant that idea, and so that this becomes an international effort where the funding can be made available and the resources can be made available. But to your point, you're exactly right, is that to the extent that the Palestinian people feel that they're suffering and they're the object of the military operations, they're not going to break any allegiance. And the other thing, on many practical levels, one of the key values in any type of conflict is intelligence, human intelligence.
Right. And how can you extract that if they are hostile? Let me stop you right there, Mr. Chairman. We need to take a break. Segment 2 of the Takeout coming your way in just 1 second from the Senate Hideaway. The Senate Armed Services Chairman, Jack Reed of Rhode Island.
I think the longer Israel defers that sort of future projection of what their plans are, the more uncertainty is existing.
Welcome back to the Takeout. Continuing our conversation with the Senate Armed Services Committee Chairman Jack Reed. Mr. Chairman, I want to read to you a quote from Volker Turk, who is the UN Commissioner for Human Rights. He says that Hamas and Israel have both committed war crimes. Do you agree with that?
I definitely think Hamas has. There's no other way to describe the depravity. The issue with Israel is one of proportionality in terms of the weapons they use, the
care with which those weapons are used, or lack thereof,
and it comes down, frankly, in these cases, to individual incidents of whether or not this specific situation was excessive force was used. Mm-hmm. I think that's an issue that the world community can't ignore, and nor can Israel.
In your mind, it's an open question.
I think it is because at this point, the evidence has not been sufficiently accumulated. But one of the messages, in fact, we communicated to several senators, communicated to the president, that we have to ensure that the Israelis, particularly if they're using our equipment, are following the rules of law. So there cannot be, you can't ignore this issue. There has to be accountability.
I want to read to you another quote. This is from Martin Griffiths, who's the UN Undersecretary for Humanitarian Assistance and Emergency Relief. Quote, "The current conflict is a wildfire that could consume the region." Do you agree?
Yes, there's not a more sophisticated view of the totality of the events by everyone involved. The Iranians who have interest there, Hezbollah, et cetera, this could rapidly go out of control. In fact, one thinks back to the Guns of August, where an incident took place in the Balkans that suddenly consumed the entire continent of Europe.
Triggered World War I.
Exactly. So we have to think very carefully about this. And I think the United States and the President has done a good job of sending strong signals of deterrence to Iran, to Hezbollah and others by moving our carrier task forces in, et cetera. And also I think, though, that this is where Israel's operational techniques have to be improved. More precision weapons, much better intelligence, again, human intelligence as well as electronic intelligence. And then also I think this goes to sending a message to the world that there's going to be ultimately a transition to a period and a time when the Palestinian people will live in peace and safety as well as Israeli people. And I think the longer Israel defers that sort of future projection of what their plans are, the more uncertainty is existing.
In other words, it would be, from your perspective as the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, wise for Israel to explain what its end game either is or may look like in terms of a two-state solution and what comes on the other side of this for Palestinian civilians, not aligned with Hamas?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think...
that's a problem for Benjamin Netanyahu because many parts of his coalition government don't foresee a two-state solution. They're actively hostile to that.
I know that. And that is, I think, impeding their ability to send a message appropriately to not just the Palestinian people, but to the whole world, and also to adjoining states, and states that like Jordan, who have been very, very staunch allies of Israel, but now are under tremendous pressure on their streets from their populations. To stabilize the region, you've got to be able to say, well, our hope is, and we'll try, but at this point it's a hope, is that we'll reach a point where For example, the Palestinian Authority will be of sufficient capability and goodwill to be able to govern in Gaza and govern in the West Bank.
That's also a problem, though, is it not,
I
Mr.
understand.
Chairman? Because the Palestinian Authority is regarded as weak, corrupt, aged, and no match for Hamas.
Well, yes, and that would require an infusion of youth, of resources, and of talent into the Palestinian Authority.
And on the question of resources, does that need to come from other Arab states?
Well, it would help a lot. As I said, I've suggested...
Get off the sidelines.
I've suggested to the Saudis and to the Egyptians that they put in significant resources, and certainly the Saudis have those resources, in order to give capabilities to the Palestinians in order to be, govern themselves, and do so in a way that they don't present a threat to Israel. And if that's the case, then I think it's a better world over there.
So let's talk a little bit about the Palestinian Authority. The Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority has recently said, direct quote, "What Israel is doing is not a war against Hamas, but a war against all Palestinian people." Agree or disagree, and helpful or unhelpful?
It's unhelpful. I disagree, and I think that's another example of where Israel has to make a much more stronger case to the world that these words are completely inaccurate. And that's where even the things they've done today, the 4-hour pause, sends a good message. Getting fuel into hospitals without it being intercepted by Hamas, that's a good message. Clausewitz said it, war is an extension of politics by other means. The other side of that is that a lot of war is politics, of what political messages you're sending, how are you convincing...
What are you leaving behind? What are you leaving in your wake? What are you creating from the warfare you're waging?
Exactly. And I think that's something that should be done. But there's an equal responsibility, and people forget, on the part of the Palestinian Authority to stand up and to represent well the people of Palestine. I mean, one of the not oddities, I don't know what the word is, but the Palestinian Authority were controlling Gaza, and Hamas won an election.
Yep. Yes, it did.
So
the one and only election held in 2006.
Yes. So that shows me that the Palestinian Authority really wasn't doing as much as the Palestinians in the West Bank hoped for.
I've heard you say that Hamas hates Jews and doesn't really care about Palestinians.
That's right.
What's the evidence of the second part of that phrase?
Well, the fact that they would build significant command posts below refugee camps.
Or hospitals.
Or hospitals, knowing
No doubt in your mind that that's true.
No doubt, from the intelligence I've seen, that they do that. That they would use innocent Palestinians as shields. And if you look at, the way they run the Gaza, it's basically they're not doing anything out of their way to help the ordinary Palestinian. The leaders are making quite a bit of money, and they're extracting quite a bit of money from the Palestinians.
Siphon
food,
fuel,
tax them on things like generators, which they need just to keep the lights on and things going. So this is not Hamas is not a beneficial.
Would you even call it a governing authority?
No, it's not. It's a dictatorship run by a cadre of terrorists.
Mm-hmm. We have just a couple of seconds left, so I don't want to launch us into another big topic, but in the 30 seconds or so we have left, would it be helpful and wise for the Israelis to not be as aggravating to the Palestinians in the West Bank right now?
I think it would, and I think...
Not that that's a small topic.
No, I think it would. I think it would be helpful to them, and again, in this creating the kind of image and validating their honest and fundamental beliefs that they have to destroy Hamas, but their intention is not to destroy the Palestinian people. If you start in an area which they effectively control, if you start helping the Palestinian Authority become more responsive and responsible, if it looks as if that is a pathway to a decent life for Palestinians, that'll send a message worldwide, and particularly into Gaza. And then, of course, the Israelis have to make sure they get that message out. They can do it with media. They can do it with other things.
Our conversation with Senator Jack Reed, Chairman of the Armed Services Committee on the Senate side, will continue in just a moment.
Well, I think the message that we have to send out is that anti-Semitism is profoundly wrong. Islamophobia is profoundly wrong.
Welcome back to the Takeout, continuing our conversation with Senate Armed Services Committee Chairman Jack Reed. So there was a conversation in the House this week to censure a member of the House. Without getting into that, because that's the other part of the legislative branch, from your perspective, is there anything benign about the phrase "from the river to the sea"?
I must confess, I was not so focused on the comments of my colleague in the House to see that phrase until it was in the headline of a newspaper. So I can't comment in any type of significant detail.
I mean, do you interpret that when you hear that from those who are either in Congress or out of Congress who are supportive of the Palestinian side as a means to call for the extinction of the State of Israel? Because that's certainly how Jewish Americans hear that.
Well, if that was the intent, or even remotely connected to the intent, that would be absolutely wrong. We're the first nation in the world to recognize the State of Israel. We have been partners, and they've supported many of our efforts. And frankly, we have, I think, a solemn commitment to support the State of Israel, and we will keep that commitment.
College campuses across this country are roiled with this conversation. First of all, do you have any thoughts on that one way or the other? And I'm sure you agree with this, but I just want to make sure. You can disagree with the Israeli government and not be anti-Semitic. You can be sympathetic to Palestinians and their suffering without supporting Hamas.
Yes.
How do you see that either not functioning or being misdirected on college campuses, either from the students themselves or the governing bodies or even the administration of the universities?
Well,
because now Jewish students say they don't even feel safe going to class or getting a meal on campus. Well, and there are some Arab American students who feel the same way.
Well, I think the message that we have to send out is that anti-Semitism is profoundly wrong. Islamophobia is profoundly wrong. That attacking or denigrating an individual because of their race or many other factors is not what the American way is. We share in America not a commonality of race or anything else, but of a spirit of a democracy that respects other people, that respects different views of other people, that allows those views to be expressed. So to be an American is not to be one race or culture. It's to agree to the spirit.
Let's say, for example, to criticize Israeli government for increasing settlements in the West Bank, or saying that may be a violation of underlying UN resolutions, is not anti-Semitism.
I think we have to maintain the ability to not only work with all of our allies, not just Israel, but point out areas where we disagree. And I think one of the issues that has become a point of friction between the United States and several different administrations has been settlements in the West Bank, the treatment of the West Bank. You know, I recall the heady days when Prime Minister Barack and Yasser Arafat and Bill Clinton were standing together, and it looked like we had a two-state settlement that would have been acceptable to all sides, and unfortunately that evaporated.
Yes.
And now we're in this struggle, historic struggle. And I think it is appropriate, not only appropriate, but I think it's important.
And on the other side of that ledger, it's not Islamophobic to say Hamas is not a resistance movement.
It is definitely not. You just have to read the charter of Hamas. They are committed to the destruction of the Jewish people. Mm-hmm. It is, cannot be defended. I mean, in that point.
There are U.S. military personnel, as you well know, Mr. Chairman, in Iraq and Syria. There have been more than 40 various kinds of harassing, mortar, and other kind of attacks, 2 retaliatory strikes ordered by President Biden. What is going on there? It doesn't seem like the Iranian-backed militias or those who are harassing this way are getting the message. Is this a potential trigger point that we have to be more concerned about or more worried about?
We have to be concerned about it. And we are, as you point out, taking steps to make it clear that we're not
Are those steps strong enough?
I think what we're seeing, which makes some sense, I think, is a gradual escalation. Not just our last strike was against a major munitions depot, which we, again, minimize casualties but maximize destruction of valuable war material. And I think the message is, while being very careful about casualties, of taking out more and more valuable installations if possible, impose a cost so that they don't feel they have a free ride at attacking our service members. They don't.
Mm-hmm. The French President Macron said on this day, November 8th, that there needs to be a very rapid humanitarian truce and we must work for a ceasefire. Do you believe a ceasefire of any duration is in the best interest of the Israeli government, military, or its objectives in Gaza?
Well, I think a ceasefire would have to be an agreement between both sides with conditions which both sides must meet. Hamas appears uninterested in doing anything except...
And the Netanyahu government has said that has to be about hostages.
Yeah, absolutely.
All of them. Not 10 or 20, all of them.
That is, that's the condition they're laying down.
You're supportive of that?
Well, I don't think that, again, that I've seen nothing from Hamas suggesting that it would cease any type of offensive operations or anything else. They're calling for a unilateral ceasefire. A real ceasefire is when both sides say, okay, we're not going to fight, we're going to talk, and we're going to talk seriously about hostages, seriously about what we mutually can do and what you want us to do, etc. So a unilateral ceasefire wouldn't be helpful.
And the Netanyahu government has made it abundantly clear it is on a war footing, and the objective is to destroy Hamas, not negotiate with it.
That's right.
Is that an achievable objective?
Well, in the past, they have had battles with Hamas, and they've found ways to stop the battles with Hamas. And in fact, over the last several years, they seem to have a growing working relationship. More and more Palestinians were being allowed to come into Israel to work, etc. In fact, it appeared, I think, to the leaders in Israel that Hamas had basically settled into a sort of this comfortable relationship where, of course, we're going to sloganize against Israel, but we're not.
A miscalculation, it now appears.
Indeed, yes.
Catastrophic.
Certainly.
Psychologically catastrophic.
Absolutely.
Because I heard you say after returning from Israel that there are now within this contemporary population of the state of Israel feelings of Holocaust anxiety, that there is nowhere to hide.
Right, exactly. I think this was traumatic to the Israelis. Just to a degree, 9/11 was traumatic to us, but I mean,
much more intimately, though.
But not as heartbreaking as the notion that I think most Israelis felt that this is once again a Holocaust.
No kibbutzim is safe.
We're not safe. I mean, one of the most poignant points was someone mentioned that they were leaving in the morning. Their wife came up to whisper in there and said, "I want to show you where I think we can hide the children." Mm-hmm. Families should not live that way. Mm-hmm. Not Israeli families, not Palestinian families. But this horror is so palpable to the Jewish community. We understand it, we recognize it, but it is not so visceral and it's just so meaningful as it is to the Jewish population all across the world. So that is one of the reasons why this is a very difficult operation for the Israelis to conduct, because you have to be as logical and as pragmatic and as flexible as you can in a military operation. It's hard to do that when the sense is, this is they've.
As the president said, be careful of your rage. Rage can sometimes blind you. That is the voice of Jack Reed, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Segment 4 of the Takeout in just one moment.
The good news for us here in the Senate is Senator McConnell is strongly committed to aid for Ukraine and many other Republicans.
Welcome back to the Takeout. The chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Jack Reed, is our special guest. All right, lots of other things to get to, and we'll try to get to them as quickly as possible. The president has also made a request of $60 billion to assist Ukraine. It's bogged down in the House. What are its prospects in the Senate? Give my listeners and viewers a sense of where do you think this is ultimately going to land, and if that aid is going to be approved by Congress, signed by the president, and sent to the Ukrainians in time.
It has to be.
Will it be? Those are two different things.
I know that, but the good news for us here in the Senate is Senator McConnell is strongly committed to aid for Ukraine and many other Republicans. If we do not support the Ukrainians, then we have lost a significant battle, if you will, not a conflict, kinetic conflict, but Putin will eventually use this to undermine NATO, will use this to undermine the Ukrainian government, will continue his efforts. If he succeeds...
And the whole security structure, as Europe has known it since World War II.
It could undermine entirely the security structure, but also what it could do is prompt Russia, Putin, to rest, regroup for a while, but then make an assault on another country. And if it's the Baltics, those are NATO allies, we're there with troops. My message is very simple. I'd rather send resources than young Americans. We have to get.
And don't kid yourself that this could come.
Oh, it could come. If we falter, it'll be exploited, obviously, by the Russians. But also, it will be used by our allies as a measure of our consistency, our support, our endurance, etc. And if they can see that we're only good for a year or two, then guess what? They're looking for different arrangements.
You invoked the name of the Senate Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, but he's made it very clear, as his Republican colleagues, that one of the negotiating components of aid to Ukraine is significant changes to border security policy. Are you supportive of those? Can you find your way to, and do your Democratic colleagues find their way to accept most, some, all of those?
Well, first of all, we all have to recognize the president has included $12 billion.
Right, but they want policy changes on what asylum is and methods in, all that sort of stuff. Remain in Mexico, things like that, that many of your Senate Democratic colleagues are not in favor of, and the White House isn't either.
We have to go ahead and talk to them.
Hammer it out.
But the one thing we have to keep pointing to is, in the near term, the most important issues facing us are, I believe, Israel and Ukraine, particularly since the president is not ignoring the border in his budget. There's $12 billion. Secretary Mayorkas was here yesterday before the Appropriations Committee. That's going to be used for very sophisticated equipment, for more personnel, for an ability by the United States to be much more responsive to the crisis at the border. And $12 billion is not just a mere sort of token. That is a significant investment in security.
Mm-hmm. To be resolved later, though. This is not going to be sorted out anytime soon.
Well, it's going to have to be resolved, I assume, because if the Republicans tie it to Ukraine and Israel, we have to get that done fairly quickly. And then also we have the continuing resolution that expires next week. But this calls for, given the situation internationally and domestically, this calls for thoughtful compromise.
A grand compromise. It really seems to me. If you're going to put Israel, Ukraine, and border security together, that's a big bill. That's a lot of give and take and a lot of hard work.
Exactly.
Has it even begun, seriously?
It has begun, and fortunately, in terms of the leadership, we're starting from, not completely separate positions. Both Senator McConnell, Senator Schumer understand Israel aid. The issues probably might come down to what type of border issues or policies we can talk about.
Here's something else you know very, very well. 452 generals and flag officers are being held in legislative limbo by Alabama Republican Tommy Tuberville. Is there an off-ramp? How soon can you achieve it, and by what means will you achieve it? Because I know you want this done. You don't want it done one or two. You've said that again and again. This has to be done, if not en masse, something very close to that. What does that look like? When does that happen?
Well, I think one of the most significant developments has been the work of my colleagues on the Republican side.
Need 10 votes, though.
Senator Sullivan, yes, we do, but Senator Sullivan, Senator Ernst, Senator Young, others came down to the floor and basically tried to get their nominations through. They were objected to by Senator Tuberville, but that's the first time we've seen publicly Republican senators and experienced, with military experience, come out and say, this is wrong, we have to fix it. So we've changed the momentum dramatically. We hope that Senator Tuberville will respond to that in a thoughtful, positive way and say, okay, I get it, I'm going to drop these things. We have a resolution that is going through the Rules Committee that will require a vote, and you're right, we'll need 9 or 10 Republican supporters that will basically suspend that type of hold for the rest of the Congress.
A legislative workaround.
Exactly.
Right. Are you close on that?
I think we're breaking through. I think the Senator Sullivan and Senator Ernst and their colleagues sent a strong message that they want this to end too. And I think they're working very hard to get it done without even the resolution. But when the resolution comes, and we'll have to bring it up, and then we'll have to make the case that our national security in a significant way and the readiness of our armed service and the health and welfare of military families has been sacrificed by Republicans for a partisan political issue.
Has Senator Tuberville painted himself into a corner that he doesn't know how to get out of?
He is getting some help from his colleagues about ways that he could get out of it, and the question is, will he take their advice? And I think their advice is very well-intended and well-meaning, not only for the military, but for Senator Tuberville.
What's the harm? What are flag officers and generals suffering from in this limbo?
Well, first of all, there's a readiness issue. Early in this process, 7 secretaries of defense, including secretaries under Republican and Democratic presidents, wrote a letter saying this is going to severely harm the readiness of the military. Our acting secretaries of the service at the moment came out publicly and said this is affecting readiness. We have general officers in limbo that they should be. For example, the former president of the Naval War College is sitting in Newport, where she should have been 6 months ago in Brussels as our senior advisor, military advisor. We are now conducting a campaign to help the Ukrainians. NATO is critical to that, and yet we've got someone just holding the place for a while. So you can look at around across the military and see huge problems with readiness. But it's sending a much deeper signal. It's sending a signal to not just those that are being held, but to everyone else in the military that they become political tokens. They can be used for political purposes. That's not what we've ever done with respect to the military to this extent. We have always respected the professionalism of the military. These individuals selected on merit, not political affiliation or anything else. And we're disregarding that, and that'll cause a significant harm. A lot of talented young colonels will say, hey, I can retire right now and get a job that pays 3 times as much. What am I doing this for? Military families are sitting around and saying, the kids can't go to the school we registered them for because we haven't got our orders to move yet. You're ruining your children's chances of going to school. This is cruel and as well as thoughtless.
That is the voice of Senator Jack Reed, Chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. So ends this episode of The Takeout. Make sure you stay tuned for the Takeout Outtake Especial.
Our economic power, if it's used adroitly, can be as useful as our military power. And we have to, I think, get a little bit better at using that economic power.
Welcome to your Takeout Outtake Especial. I'm Major Garrett. We're in the Senate hideaway of the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Jack Reed of Rhode Island. That number is 144. If you're ever wandering around the Capitol, make sure you knock and knock politely. Senator Reed, it's good to see you. A couple of other things on the policy side. There was a Republican presidential debate earlier this week. Among the things that were said was that there needs to be military action by the United States government in Mexico against drug cartels. Are you in favor of such an idea? If you're not, why not?
I don't think it's an idea that has merit at all. To engage militarily with Mexico is essentially to start a war. And I don't think the Mexican government or the Mexican people would calmly accept our entrance with military forces there. And you would have some type of response by the Mexicans and
the cartels.
And the cartels and everybody else. And, that's just inappropriate. This is a criminal justice issue, criminal procedures issue. That's why we have the Border Patrol there. We have some military on the border, but they, under posse comitatus, cannot perform law enforcement activities. They are there to support law enforcement. This has to be treated as a law enforcement issue.
Well, Republicans talk about special operators going into Mexico.
Well, that's nice, but what do they say when the special operators go into the United States from Mexico? And in retaliation, what do they say when the United States as we stand up for countries like Ukraine and Israel who were invaded and assaulted by outside forces, and we do the same thing? What does America stand for? It would be reckless, actually.
There was also a numerical conversation on the stage of the Republican presidential debate about the proper number of Navy vessels. Should it be 600? Should it be 400? Should it be 355? What is the proper number? And is the president oriented sufficiently to achieving whatever that possible best operational number is?
Well, I think today it's less about numbers than it is about capabilities.
Numbers can be misleading, in other words.
Numbers can be misleading, and it's also not only about the total number. It's the number of effective ships that are at sea. So we are working in the Armed Services Committee to improve our capacity to overhaul ships, get them back on duty as quickly as possible. We're increasing our investment in submarine construction because, again, it's not just number of ships, it's what ships do you have. We could build lots of Navy ships that would not be effective against
In this conversation, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie said the only thing that really matters right now is the number of subs.
Well, submarines are critical to our national security, and they all begin in Rhode Island.
I knew that.
The construction. They are critical, and we are ramping up our production significantly because not only are we now building American submarines, we're cooperating with the Australians to help them first use some of our submarines, but second, to help them construct their own attack submarines. So submarine is, I think, the key vessel, and we have to make more investment in it. But, to Governor Christie's comments, it goes back to my point. It's not numbers, it's capabilities. And one of the capabilities that we don't pay enough attention to in public discourse is the ability to communicate without interruption in a world in which satellite communication will be compromised very quickly because of our enemies, where other types of communication could be disrupted. If we have the advantage in communication, if we can communicate and our enemies can't, then we can outmaneuver them, outfight them, and win. So it's not just in this new world or any situation in the past, a number of items of ordnance. It's how well they're coordinated, what capacities they have, what can they do, and that's what we're working on.
Very quickly, Hamas was in Russia once this year, twice last year. Iran is providing drones to the Russians to use in Ukraine. What do we make of that collaboration?
Well, it's not a good collaboration because at some point the Iranians will ask for reciprocal benefits, and which could make them much more lethal in the region. We don't want to see that. Their assistance to Russia has definitely helped the Russians maintain their offensives and their operations in Ukraine. That's not good. So, putting both diplomatic pressure and other types of pressure, sanctions, not only directly on the Ukraine, but secondary sanctions on those who deal with them, excuse me, not Ukraine, but Iran, is very, very crucial. I think one of the lessons we've learned is that our economic power, if it's used adroitly, can be as useful as our military power. And we have to, I think, get a little bit better at using that economic power.
As the voice of Senator Jack Reed, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. So it concludes your Takeout Outtake Especial. I know this wasn't necessarily fun and games. We've done that when he's been on the show before. And right now, it just doesn't feel like a fun and games time with the Senate Armed Services Committee chairman. We will see you next week. Thanks.
Thank you.